Data Platform Summit attendees, greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Today I am happy to record this session, Azure Data Factory for Beginners, Does It Make Data, for you to view during the event. My name is Leslie Andrews, and I am currently a lead data architect at 3Cloud, where I have been since November of 2019. I work with Azure technologies like Data Factory, Databricks, and Synapse. I've previously worked in the public sector at the state of New Mexico and the city of Albuquerque in the judiciary and in law enforcement, and I have experience in electrical supply chain and healthcare. I've been speaking since 2018 regularly at SQL Saturdays and other community events. I spoke at Past Summit last year and was an IDERA ACE in 2019. I have my Azure certifications in data engineering and data analyst. I am active on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can find me at landrews5807 on both platforms. And finally, we are hiring at 3Cloud, and if you are interested, check out my Twitter profile for my pinned tweet with a link where you can apply and see the positions we have open. Today's session, like I said before, is Azure Data Factory for Beginners. This is a 100-level session where we will focus on understanding its purpose, how to create one, and then some simple demos moving data around. So let's look at the official definition of Data Factory. It is a cloud-based ETL and integration tool that creates data-driven workflows and orchestrates data movement and transformations at scale. So what does that mean? Well, a data integration service is one that, now put on your surprised faces, integrates data. Seriously though, Data Factory is a service that is managed and processes are developed in a web browser interface. But what does it do? Well, using Azure Data Factory, you can create and schedule data-driven workflows called pipelines that can ingest data from disparate data stores. Here's a sample of some of the sources that you can use in your Data Factory currently. You can build complex ETL processes that transform data with data flows, or you can use compute services such as Azure HD Insight, Azure Databricks, or Synapse. Additionally, you can publish these transformed data to Synapse for your business intelligence, Power BI, Tableau reporting tools to use. So how does it do it? Well, it takes a pipeline, which is a logical grouping of activities that together perform a task. For example, a pipeline could contain a set of activities that ingest and clean log data, and then kick off a mapping data flow to analyze it. A pipeline allows you to manage the activities as a set instead of each one individually, and you deploy and schedule the pipeline instead of those activities independently. Linked services are much like connection strings if you're used to the SSIS environment. They define the connection information needed for Data Factory to connect to those external resources. And a data set is just a named view of data that points or references the data you want to use that's connected to the linked service. And we use those in our activities as inputs and outputs. So this diagram shows the relationship between the pipelines, the activities, and the data sets. An activity can have 0 or more input data sets, and it can produce 1 or more output data sets. And a pipeline is a logical grouping of activities that are scheduled, monitored, and managed. Your Azure Data Factory has a default integration runtime that's called Auto Resolve Integration Runtime, and it's created when you create your Data Factory. And what does it do? Lots of things. When you do a data flow, it executes it in the managed Azure compute environment where the runtime is living. When you move data, it copies the data across the network, either in a public or private, on-prem or virtual private networks. And it provides support for the built-in connectors and format conversions and column mappings. When it dispatches an activity and monitors those transformation activities running on Databricks, machine learning, or SQL Server. It can also natively execute SSIS packages. So when you create your Data Factory and it creates the default integration runtime, it gets created in the default region when it is started up. So it may be in a different place every time. If you have specific legal or regulatory reasons to make sure that your data stays in a certain region, you can create your own runtime in a specific region so that you're still in compliance with any regulatory rules that you have to comply with your data. So there are 3 types of integration runtimes. The Azure integration runtime is what the default auto resolve is. There's a self-hosted integration runtime. And if you are going to be copying data from the cloud and on-prem or between 2 on-prem, then you need to have a self-hosted runtime. There's also the Azure SSIS integration runtime, which you would use to execute SSIS packages natively through Azure Data Factory. So now that we have a basic understanding of what Data Factory is and what it's supposed to do, we're going to do some demos. We have 3 pretty simple demos, extractions from different sources. The SQL Server is in a completely different subscription altogether. So we have the Stack Overflow 2010, the Blob Storage account, and then the Synapse Stack Overflow Data Warehouse. The demos themselves are actually copying the data from that SQL Server in the other resource group to my Blob Storage, from Blob Storage into some staging tables on Synapse, and then a full ETL process with a configuration table that will allow us to be very dynamic in the creation of our pipelines. So I'm going to pop over here to my portal. If you're going to be doing any work in Azure, you have to have a subscription on the portal. You do get to sign up and get a free month with, I believe it's currently $150 worth of credit to play around and do new things. To create a data factory, you would create a resource. We can search the marketplace for data factory. And then we can push the create button. This will take us to the creation page. If you're familiar with Azure, this should be pretty familiar to you. You have to select a subscription that you're going to run it in. You have to select the resource group that it's going to be in, the region, you have to give it a name, and what version it is. There is a way to incorporate your data factory with Git. And if you want to be able to save work in progress or work in a team environment, you have to have the Git configuration set up. To do that, you have to have your either Azure DevOps or GitHub, and the repository has to be created. You have to have your account all set up, a repo name, and a branch set up. For this demo, we're not going to do that, so we're just going to hit the configure Git later. For networking, you can either choose whether you want the default auto resolve integration runtime to be provisioned on demand, or you can choose to provision it explicitly. And the self-hosted integration runtime, so we can connect to a public or a private endpoint. We're going to leave the defaults for this. Using the customer managed key allows you to work on a customer environment, but then create our own keys in the key vault. And it allows you to just have a better control over the security and being able to use a customer managed key so that you can turn things back over. Just like all Azure resources, you can tag things. And then we're going to review and create. And it's mad at us because we haven't filled out. Oh, it doesn't like my space. So now we go, oh, still not happy. Oh, already taken. But we're not really going to create this, so it doesn't matter. If we had passed validation, then it would have created our data factory. And when it was finally provisioned and launched, it would take us to this page. Leave this. So this is the page that when you go to your portal and say launch my data factory, that's the page that it opens. So if we come down here and we say we want to open the data factory, it takes us to this landing page. So here's where we can see information about our factory. We can see activity logs, so we can find out what jobs have run, what things have been created. We can control our access. We can add tags if we had not done that during our creation. We can do our networking. We want to connect to a private endpoint. We want to change that. Managed identity. Here's the name of our data factory, the location, the subscription, the resource group. If you need to have your connection strings, any information about your data factory. You can see any locks that are on it. There's a quick start guide for developing in the data factory or using the software developer kit. We can set up monitoring alerts. We have metrics that we can see about our data factory. So these are all standard integration runtime queue links. So if you need to be doing some reports, you can get all that information from here. We have diagnostic settings that we can set up. The logs. We can create some queries that show us about our availability, the activity, triggered runs. We can automation tasks. This is in preview. And then we can do some support and troubleshooting, resource health. We can diagnose and solve our problems and look. But I hear you saying, Leslie, I don't see anything about pipelines or linked services. Well, that's because, like I said, this is the monitoring tool. This is the management of the data factory. To actually open the data factory, we have to click this button right here, Open Azure Data Factory Studio. Now, fun fact, the layout of this was recently changed. One of the fun things about working with cloud services is that you never know when they're going to completely change the way something looks and feels. So this is a fairly new version of Data Factory. You can see right here, it's going to tell me that it allows me to configure a Git repository, and it wants me to set that up. We're not going to do that right now, though, so I'm just going to close that. Here's the main landing page when you open up Data Factory. It shows you things that you've recently opened or worked on. And again, really cool, we have tutorials and videos and community content that you can get from right here. And there are so much information out there about things that you can do and cool processes that people have implemented that you can just learn so much about best practices, and anything that you want really is out there to learn from. So it shows you your recent resources. I'm going to start down here in the managed section of the data factory because that's where we set up our linked services. So like I told you before, linked services are like connection strings in SSIS. And so we are going to create linked services that go to a variety of data sources that we can have. So here are all of the linked services that are currently available in Data Factory to connect to. So you see we have Cassandra, we have a DB2 connector, a GitHub, if you want to do some queries on that, Hive, Informix, MariaDB, MongoDB, I want to say SAP. Yep, we have SAP Cloud, SAP HANA, SQL Server. So these are all of the things that you can connect to. So if we come over here and we look, this LACE Stack Overflow 2010, this is actually the Stack Overflow database on my personal SQL Server, the one that's outside of the scope. And so I've put in my authentication, my username and password. You can enter it manually. You can pull it in from subscription. I'm going to go ahead and turn on our interactive authoring, which allows us to run queries on the fly for testing our connections and viewing available table names or stored procedure names. This auto-resolve integration runtime has to be running for that to happen. So by clicking that open and doing that, we turned that on. Go ahead and discard that. We'll come over here. We'll see our integration runtime here. Let's see if we can see that it's running now. So to add a new linked service, you tell it what kind of service that you want to add. We'll just do SQL Server. Enter the information. You can also use your Azure Key Vault, which is probably the most secure way to access your data sources. So those are our linked services. If you haven't set up your Git configuration, here's where you would come to do that. So in Manages, we can have our Git configuration, and we can configure that. ARM templates are how you actually move your data factory processes around. So you export it, and it comes with all the information that the data factory needs to run, and then you can import it into a different environment. Triggers are what execute pipelines on a schedule, so you can set those up. We can create global parameters, so if you're doing something in an enterprise level system, you can set up parameters that all your developers can use so that you've got consistency through that. Here again is where you can set up that customer managed keys that allow you to encrypt your data factory using your own key. Credentials. Oh, look, this is in preview. Didn't say that down here. And then the managed private endpoint. So if you're going to use your virtual network to create your private links. So that's all down here in the managed section. Up from that is the monitor section, which allows you to see for any given time range the execution of the pipelines that you've run. You can look and see regular runs or debug runs. So if you're looking for debug information, this is where you would come to see that. And then here's the big deal where we're going to spend most of our time is in the authoring. So when we set this up, we have our pipelines, we have our data sets, which are connected to our linked services. Data flows, I don't have any created now, but these are similar to the way that you could in SSIS do data wrangling, mash it up. You could combine data sets from different sources and create your own data set within SSIS. That's what data flows allows you to do. And then we can see that Power Query is in preview. And this is the same Power Query that is available in Power BI and Excel. So if you're familiar with using Power Query in either of those tools, once this becomes GA, then you'll be able to use that here. So if we're going to go and look what one of our data sets here. So we have the data set that goes to our databases. Let's pop over here real quick to SSMS. We can see that we have our Synapse instance here and my SQL Server that has the backup of the Stack Overflow 2010 that I got from Brent Ozark. And within it, there's just a couple of tables. It's not a really big system. With badges, comments, link types, posts. And then we have our Synapse instance where I've created staging tables and data warehouse tables. It might be in your true environment that these are on different servers, different databases. It might be that you're using the Synapse copy activity in data flow, data factory, excuse me, and it will automatically do some of the staging for you from your base system to blob storage into your data warehouse. So depending on what your environment is and how you need this to work, you can have a variety of setups. So this lace stack overflow is the linked service. So we can test this connection, and it's going to tell us that it connected. We can push edit, and it will actually open up the linked service. We can see that this is my LACE server. LACE, by the way, is Leslie Andrews Consulting Enterprises, and I don't really do that anymore, but I didn't want to give up all of my stuff. Just got our changes there. And you can see here that I haven't added a table. And that's because within our data factory, I want to loop through all of the tables that are out there in my configuration. And so by leaving this blank, it allows me to parameterize this later on. We can also create parameters for our data set. I have a data set here for my storage. To have that open. Let's pop over here to the portal and we'll go to my storage account. Now you can either open Storage Explorer, but really cool now we have a Storage Explorer preview here within. So here we go, DPS 2021. Here's my blob. I have the daily extract file, and here's all of my files that came in from the last time I ran this back on the 15th. And where we go. So we can test this connection. And you can see that for this, the parameters are a little different. It wants to know the dataset container, the dataset directory, and the dataset file. So we're having to pass this information in. We did that using these dynamic content, telling it that we want the dataset container. So it's going to come out here and it's going to connect to the data set and know that this is where we're going to. All right, so let's do a demo. We've got this all set up a little bit. So my first demo here is extract and load to storage. Now, when I first started working with Data Factory, I didn't think that this would be a very popular choice of actions to do. I assumed that most of the time you would be just copying it from a database to a database. But so far, in all 3 or 4 of the Data Factory jobs that I've been working on, all of them have taken the data from the source system and loaded it to blob storage first. And I guess that's just more common than I expected it to be. So this copy data is the first activity in the move and transform activities that are available to us. Let's actually go ahead and look at some of these. We have Azure functions that we can call, batch services. In Databricks, we can call a notebook, a jar, or Python script. Data analytics, we can do a USQL. There are quite a few general. We can append a variable, we can delete things, we can execute a pipeline or an SSIS package. Lookup is used quite a bit in order to get a list of things and then iterate through them. We can call stored procedures. We can set variables. Sometimes this is useful if you need to know the number of records that you are going to be processing so that you can batch them in some manner. You can connect to a web, like an API. We have some iteration and conditional functions. We can filter. We can do a for each, like I said, with the lookup combination. You can do an if. We can switch depending on a value in a table or a variable. And then the Power Query and machine learning. So it really is a powerful tool in all of the things that it is possible to do and call from the Data Factory. Today, we're mostly going to concentrate on copying data. So this copy data activity has a source. This is where the data is coming from. And like I said, this is the Stack Overflow database. And it basically concatenates together the parameters that came in from the lookup, and it parses them out and executes this stored procedure, or I'm sorry, this query, and then it syncs it into the Parquet sync, where we were just looking in the storage container. So we have a container name, a directory name, and a file name. So if we trigger this now, we were going to get a prompt that asks us what table and values we want for these parameters that we have. I'm actually going to change this to badges. And we're going to change the file name to badges. And so we're going to get all of the fields in the DBO badges schema on our source system. And we're going to copy it to the DPS 2021 daily extract badges file. Go ahead and push OK for that. So now it's running the pipeline. We can go over to our monitor and we can see, oh, it must be queued. Well, let's see. Yeah, see, it actually hasn't started yet. It's queued up. Oh, why is it going to take like a long time? So while we're waiting for this to get started, I will say that while the examples that we have in our demo here today are fairly simple and straightforward, some of the production pipelines that I've built have been pretty complex. So down here we can see now that it succeeded. If we click on here, this shows us what the input to the activity was. So we have our source, which are our database, our query, we have our sync, and then we have our output. It tells us how much data was read and written, how many rows were copied. And if you click on the little glasses here, it shows you the actual data movement that occurred, how much happened, what the throughput was, how long it took, how many DIUs you cost or used, which is based on billing. So that helps you determine how much it's going to cost you to run your activities. So now we can come back over here to our file and we can see that badges has now been updated as of right now, 8:27, 11:25 a.m. Cool beans. Our second step in our demos is to import that from that file to the staging table. So again, I just have a simple copy activity. If we look at our source, now our Parquet sync is the source. Same parameters. We have to tell it the container name, the directory name, and the file name. but this is where it's going to bring that in as the source data. You can set this up so that it does a list of files, filter it by last modified. So if you want to make sure that maybe in your config table you have a last runtime, and you can make sure that you only get files that were loaded after your last runtime. Again, you can add dynamic content to all of these. Our sync is going to be the staging table in our Synapse dataset. And before we load that, we want to truncate it because it's a staging table. We want to make sure that if we're running our process every day, before it actually loads that data from the blob, that we truncate that. So we've added some dynamic content here to truncate that table. So if we add a trigger and trigger this now. Now it's saying that it's going to use the last published configuration because it's got this little dot right here and it thinks I changed something because I clicked on it. One of the things that kind of annoys me is when you just click on something to look at it. And so now we're going to say badges, and badges are our table name and our file name. It's in the DPS container and the daily extract and the badges, and we want to put it in staging badges. So if we come over to our SQL Server here and select from our staging badges table, I'm going to go ahead and truncate this for us, just so that we can see that it does get filled. And then we can run it again and see that it truncates. We can, right, so we can run this, say okay. Hopefully it won't take so long to queue since it's already started up. Maybe it will be faster. I'm thinking that's a good thing for me to troubleshoot for my next session on this, to figure out why it takes so long to queue my very simple job. Oh, yay, in progress. Copy data from blob storage. So now that this is in progress, we can push on the little glasses and we can actually see this happen in real time, the data moving. Oh, see, it's done. That was fast. 1 million records in a matter of seconds. How cool is that? So now we can come over here, we can select, and we can see that we've got our data here. And we should have the 1 million. Oh, 1,102,019. I think that's what it said we had, right? Yep, there we go. Cool. All right, so we're going to go back over here to author. We're going to discard these changes because I'm sure it was just something that I looked at. Now we want to transform and load that to our data warehouse. Now this particular one, I'm doing a stored procedure. So again, I had to tell it where the stored procedure lives. So it's on the Synapse instance. I had to select the stored procedure. And when you do that, you can import these parameters. So it goes out to the SQL Server and it says, oh, the table name is what I need. And then again, I used a parameter to drive that so that I could use this for multiple processes. This is a very easy stored procedure that is basically just copying the data from the staging table into the data warehouse table. No transformation, nothing really exciting going on here. But you can do really incredible transformations on this. It doesn't have to be a stored procedure. You could do a Databricks notebook which you could, move data around. You can do some Python scripts on it and just get, really fancy in your transformations. If you're doing big aggregates or some summarizations, whatever you want to do, whatever transformation you want. So this is just a quick stored procedure. If we go ahead and trigger that now, let's go back over here. Let's make sure that we don't have anything in our badges table, right? Show you that. Nothing there. No badges. So if we come over, we run this. It's going to pass that into our stored procedure. Again, we can view our pipeline run. Wait for it to finally queue. And then when that's done, we'll be able to come over here and we'll be able to see that we have data in our badges table. Definitely need to determine why it takes so long for that to queue. It's one of those things that sometimes when you work on stuff that other people have set up, that you maybe don't know all of the nuances of what somebody else did, and when you do it yourself, you think, well, that didn't quite work right. So now look, in our data warehouse badges, we have all of our, and again, we can probably do our count from DW. There we go. Now, again, this is just doing a straight insert from the staging to your data warehouse. It might be that you're doing some sort of type 2 transformations in your data warehouse and you need to be able to do merge queries. You could totally do that in the stored procedure. You could do cleanup. Perhaps you have tables where you use lookup values to convert everything to a standardized code. You could do that in your stored procedures. All right, so those were all pretty straightforward. This next demo, though, is more of an orchestrator. So before, when I was talking about getting a list of tables to process. So if we come back over here and we look at this config table listing. Nope, not that one. Yes, that one. So this is a table that drives the orchestrator. Again, pretty simple example, but it shows some of the things that you can parameterize and use within your data factory. You could use different server names. You could have, I'm currently working on a project where we're doing API calls, and each of the records in here is the API call and the view name and specific filtering for incremental use, this watermark date, being able to only get records that have changed after that date. And so it really allows you to have a solution that's configurable and parameter driven that just allows you to create a pattern that then you can use. So again, this is a pretty simple pattern, right? We're going to come over here and we want to look at our source schema and our staging schema and our DW schema, right? Because there are things that we have to do with each of these things. So DBO is the source schema in our database here. But when we move to our data warehouse, we have staging and DW. But all of the table names are the same. So we have to be able to get from all of these three different places with these tables. The user field list paste that up there so that we can see it big. So this particular field right here in our source system, in the Stack Overflow database that I'm selecting from, this is a varchar max. And because we're loading this into a Synapse instance, you can't use a varchar max in a column store index. And so this particular query needs a specific field list select created so that when it passes it into our iteration, it doesn't select everything because that breaks it. It goes, yeah, that field isn't doable in a Synapse. So I had to create a special little field list here so that for this one, I could do this calculation and get that data in. I have my container names, the directory names. Some of these are incremental. If you're going to have something that's incremental, then you have to have a field with a date in it that allows you to say, okay, I don't want to get anything before this date. I just want everything after it. So maybe you put in, this 1900 so that the first run through, you get all of the records. And then the next run through, you get everything from these dates after. I hope that makes sense to everybody. We're going to come back over here and we're going to look at our lookup settings. We can see that this is a Synapse data set. It has users and staging. And here is the query that we're using. Select from the config table listing where isActive equals 1. So that allows us to, during testing, only use one table. If it turns out, like in my case, this one is set to 0. This is the posts table. Think about Stack Overflow and the number of posts that it has. This is the biggest table. And for a demo, it took a really long time for this table to process and load. So I decided in the interest of time and money, because it costs a lot of money to move that much data if you're doing it for a demo, I didn't want to run this one for our purposes. So this one is not going to come back in through our lookup here. So if we do a preview data here, we're going to get a list of all of the information from that config table listing. So basically all of those records that we just looked at, except for posts, right? So we don't have posts in our link here. And then for each of those items in that list, it's going to do these 4 activities. It's going to execute step 1, step 2, step 3, and then if it's an incremental table, update that watermark. So step 1 is actually step 1 increment, which is a copy of the one that I showed you before. And that's because we had to add in this incremental field and add that into our source query. So when we look at our pipeline query now, we have, if the pipeline incremental is true, then we want to concatenate on this where clause, where the date is greater than the watermark date. Other than that, this DPS orchestrator uses the same step 2 and step 3. So it's going to, for each of the tables in the list that we did, it's going to extract that into our blob storage. Then it's going to run it from blob storage into our staging tables. And then it's going to execute our stored procedure. And then if isIncremental is true, then it's going to call another stored procedure to update the watermark date with the max date that it found in the table. So in order for all of that to work, the first thing that I have to do is on my 2 incremental loads that I loaded before, if I want these to get any data, I have to set this back because this is the last date in these tables. So I have to now it will get everything from 1900 later. If I had left it, because there is no data in these tables after 12/31/2010, it wouldn't have loaded anything because it wouldn't have found any data. So we did have to make sure that in our parameters that we declared the this is incremental as a Boolean. If you don't declare Booleans like this, then the if condition isn't going to work unless you do some sort of conversion to a string to make it a Boolean. But you have to have a Boolean that passes that in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and trigger this off. So it's going to, like I said, going to go out there and it's going to run all of those steps. So we can come over here and we can watch the pipeline as it runs. Oh, see, look, oh, that was fast, wasn't it? So it got the list of tables to process. So if we look here, we have 7 tables that we're going to process, and it tells us all of the information about those 7 items: vote types, votes, users. We can see that users got its special select statement. We can click on these, and it's showing us that it's executing step 1. Oh, see, here's where the queue happened. Darn it. I was hoping it was going to be fast. So this is going to be selecting everything from votes. We can go back in and see all of the other pipelines that are running. Cross our fingers that this will run quickly. Oh, look, some of them succeeded. Yay! So now it's moved on to step 2. So if we come over here and look at our storage, blob containers. All right, so now we can see we've got users are done, post links, post types, link types, and badges. Oh, that's the old badges. Still waiting to do badges. There's refresh. I knew it had to be here somewhere. All right, so we're waiting on comments and votes to finish. So come back over here to our factory. We can refresh this. See that it's still doing step 2. Again, we can come over here. We can open up this pipeline. You can see that this is queued. Again, that seems to be the bane of my existence on this demo. I have to fix that. Because we've spent quite a bit of time waiting on the queue process here. We'll know when this updates this date that these finished as well. Come on, little guy, you can do it. Looks like all of our step 1 finished, so we should have all of our files. Yep, so we have new versions of all of our files here. You can also set this up so that your extract has a date modifier at the end of it. So maybe you want every day's files to go in its own folder. You can, what else can you do? There are processes where you can just add new files to a folder and set up an external reference to them and read just from those files. We've come such a long way in the things that we can do. Oh, look, see, we got some watermark going on. We updated that. If it's an incremental table, let's see. Oh, so see, we can tell that the user's finished and it created the watermark date. That's the last date that's out there. We can come over here and we can select from our user table. So we can see here in our About Me that it will have truncated off anything after 4,000 characters because that's as far as we allowed it to go. I really wish that I would remember to do that, or that it wouldn't put it there. So just so if you didn't catch what that was, on Synapse, if you've used the use data schema and table name, it didn't. So this database name here, use Stack Overflow. This is not supported on Synapse, and so it will run the query, and then when it gets to the end, it'll get mad at you that it's there. So great, there we go. So looks like our whole thing finished. You know what? It's not running here. I don't have the pipeline. Oh, see, that's why. I didn't have those pipelines selected. So we can see it took 5 minutes and 41 seconds to run that. And it's not quite done yet, is it? Still doing step 3 for our last table. So it just started that. So it's just running that stored procedure to insert from the staging table into our final table. Again, come back over here. And that must have finished because now our comments are updated as well. And again, we can see that posts were not active, nothing got updated, and it wasn't run. And so, so now that we have run some pipelines, we can see in our pipeline runs information about how long it took, the pipeline run that it was triggered by, whether it was a manual trigger, any parameters that got passed through, what those were, so that we can go back and do any troubleshooting if things failed. One of the data factories that I'm currently working on does an API call, and we have to calculate chunk sizes. And so it has to loop through this API and, top 50, skip 1,000, top 50, skip 1,050. And so it has to loop through. So it's just got thousands of these API calls that it runs through. And we could use a variable to capture how many records there are and then divide those up into chunks and return a lookup set that allows us to loop through that. So it really is amazing, all of the things that you can get the data factory to set up and do for you to move your data around. So I hope that those were useful demos, and if you have any questions about them, please feel free to reach out to me. I would like to take a moment to extend a special shout out to Microsoft and the Data Platform Summit for putting on this event. The associated groups, the Data Platform Geeks and SQL Server Geeks, and all the community initiatives that go along with that. I would like to thank you for attending my session today, and please feel free to reach out to me via email or social media with any questions you may have. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session that is about to happen live. Be sure to participate at the event to win some prizes. I'm not sure what those are, but I'm sure they'll be cool. Post a selfie, give some feedback, which you should do regardless of whether or not you're going to win a prize. Visit the sponsors and the exhibitors, because without them, events like this don't happen. I hope you learned something, and I hope to get to see you in person at some event in the future. Thanks and have a great day.